Mark and David. Two brothers, branches from the same family tree, yet reaching for sunlight in vastly different directions. Mark, the elder by 5 years, was the golden boy. He possessed an effortless charm, a natural aptitude for success that seemed to follow him like a loyal shadow. From acing every exam in school to landing a coveted position at a prestigious investment firm, Mark's life was a highlight reel of achievements. He exuded confidence, a quiet self-assurance that drew people to him. He lived in a modern apartment overlooking the city, drove a sleek sports car, and seemed to effortlessly navigate the complexities of life. David, on the other hand, was the quieter, more introspective brother. He possessed a kind heart and a creative spirit, but lacked the ambition and drive that propelled Mark forward. He dabbled in various artistic pursuits, painting, writing, music, but never quite found his footing. He worked a series of unfulfilling jobs, struggling to make ends meet and constantly feeling overshadowed by his brother's accomplishments. He lived in a small, cluttered apartment in a less desirable part of town, relying on a beat-up bicycle for transportation. Despite their contrasting paths, a strong bond connected them. They shared a childhood filled with laughter, adventure, and the unspoken understanding that only siblings can possess. They were each other's confidants, offering support and encouragement through life's inevitable ups and downs. Mark, despite his success, never looked down on David. He admired David's artistic talent and often encouraged him to pursue his passions. David, in turn, was proud of Mark's achievements, even though a small part of him couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. Beneath the surface of their brotherly affection, however, lay subtle tensions. Mark, burdened by the pressure to maintain his image of perfection, sometimes struggled to understand David's lack of ambition. He would offer unsolicited advice, pushing David to be more proactive, more driven, unknowingly fueling David's insecurities. David, in turn, resented Mark's seemingly effortless success, feeling that Mark didn't truly appreciate the struggles he faced. He would occasionally make passive-aggressive comments, subtly undermining Mark's accomplishments, masking his envy with humor. Their contrasting lifestyles also created a distance between them. Mark's world revolved around corporate events, fine dining, and sophisticated social gatherings. David's world was filled with art galleries, coffee shops, and late-night jam sessions with struggling musicians. They saw each other less frequently as the years passed, their conversations becoming shorter, more superficial. The unspoken tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over, but they always managed to maintain a facade of brotherly love. They were brothers, after all, and family was supposed to stick together, no matter what. They celebrated holidays together, attended each other's important events, and maintained a semblance of normalcy, even though the unspoken differences continued to grow. This was their dynamic, a complex mix of love, admiration, envy, and unspoken expectations. It was a dynamic that would soon be shattered by a tragic event that would reveal the dark secrets hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary lives. The event would challenge their bond, test their loyalties, and ultimately force them to confront the uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. The news of Mark's death arrived like a thunderclap on a clear summer day. David was at his usual coffee shop, sketching in his notebook, when his phone rang. It was Mark's colleague, his voice strained and shaky. "David, it's Mark, he's gone." The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. David felt a cold dread creep into his bones, numbing his senses. He stumbled out of the coffee shop, the vibrant street blurring into a hazy mess. He couldn't process the information, couldn't reconcile the idea of his brother, the vibrant, successful Mark, being gone. The details that followed were a blur of confusion and grief. Mark had been found at the foot of a steep cliff overlooking the ocean. He had been hiking alone, something he often did to clear his head after a long week at work. The initial investigation pointed to a tragic accident. The police theorized that Mark had lost his footing, slipped on the loose gravel, and fallen to his death. There were no signs of foul play, no witnesses, no reason to suspect anything other than a terrible accident. David arrived at the scene, the desolate cliff overlooking the churning ocean mirroring the turmoil in his heart. The yellow police tape fluttered in the wind, a stark reminder of the finality of the situation. He watched as the paramedics carefully retrieved Mark's body, his face pale and lifeless. The sight was seared into his memory, a permanent scar on his soul. The funeral was a somber affair, filled with tearful colleagues, grieving friends, and bewildered family members. David stood numbly beside his parents, offering hollow condolences and receiving sympathetic pats on the back. He felt like an actor in a play, going through the motions of grief without truly feeling it. The shock was too profound, the loss too incomprehensible. The police investigation concluded quickly, confirming the initial assessment of accidental death. The case was closed, filed away as another tragic statistic. David, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The official explanation felt incomplete, unsatisfying. He knew Mark. He knew his habits, his routines, his personality. And something about the circumstances of his death didn't quite add up. Mark was an experienced hiker, cautious and meticulous. He wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks, especially near a dangerous cliff. He always checked the weather forecast, wore appropriate gear, and followed safety guidelines. The idea of him simply slipping and falling seemed improbable, almost impossible. David tried to voice his doubts to the police, but they dismissed his concerns as grief-fueled paranoia. They assured him that they had thoroughly investigated the scene, interviewed potential witnesses, and found no evidence to suggest anything other than an accident. They urged him to accept the official explanation and move on with his life. But David couldn't move on. He was haunted by unanswered questions, plagued by a nagging feeling that something was being overlooked. He couldn't shake the image of Mark's lifeless body, the desolate cliff, the official explanation that didn't quite fit. He knew he had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He owed it to Mark, and he owed it to himself. The accidental death ruling might have closed the case for the police, but for David, the investigation was just beginning. The weeks that followed Mark's death were a blur of grief and obsession for David. Sleep became a luxury he could barely afford, his nights filled with vivid nightmares and relentless replays of the events surrounding Mark's death. He lost his appetite, his already thin frame becoming gaunt and fragile. He neglected his artistic pursuits, his canvases gathering dust in the corner of his apartment. His entire existence revolved around unraveling the mystery of Mark's death. He started by meticulously examining Mark's belongings. He went through his apartment, carefully scrutinizing every item, searching for any clue, any inconsistency, any sign that might shed light on what really happened. He pored over Mark's financial records, searching for any unusual transactions, any hidden debts, any potential motives for foul play. He interviewed Mark's colleagues, friends, and acquaintances, asking them about Mark's state of mind in the weeks leading up to his death, searching for any hints of trouble, any signs of stress or anxiety. Most of Mark's acquaintances described him as his always charming self, if a bit preoccupied with work. A few noted he seemed more stressed than usual, working long hours and appearing somewhat withdrawn. One colleague mentioned that Mark had been involved in a heated argument with someone over the phone a few days before his death, but couldn't provide any further details. David revisited the cliff where Mark had died, meticulously searching the area for any overlooked evidence. He retraced Mark's steps, trying to imagine what he might have been thinking, what he might have been doing in the moments before his death. He found nothing of significance, only the same loose gravel and unforgiving rocks that had claimed his brother's life. He spent hours poring over maps of the area, studying the terrain, searching for alternative routes, hidden paths, anything that might offer a different perspective on the events. He even consulted with a local hiking expert, showing him photographs of the scene and asking for his opinion on the likelihood of an accidental fall. The expert confirmed that the area was indeed dangerous, but also acknowledged that an experienced hiker like Mark would have been aware of the risks and taken appropriate precautions. As David delved deeper into his investigation, he became increasingly isolated. His friends and family grew concerned about his well-being, urging him to let go of his obsession and seek professional help. They worried that he was spiraling into a state of delusion, unable to accept the reality of Mark's death. But David refused to listen. He was convinced that he was on the verge of uncovering the truth, and he wouldn't rest until he had found it. He felt a responsibility to Mark, a need to honor his memory by exposing the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He knew that the police had given up, that everyone else had accepted the official explanation, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. He owed it to Mark to keep searching, to keep digging, to keep fighting for the truth. His grief had transformed into a burning determination, a relentless pursuit of justice that consumed his every waking moment. He was a man possessed, driven by a singular purpose, to uncover the truth behind his brother's accidental death. Amidst the piles of paperwork and personal effects in Mark's apartment, David stumbled upon something unexpected, an old smartphone tucked away in a drawer. It wasn't Mark's current phone, which the police had already examined and returned. This was an older model, one Mark had likely used years ago. David remembered Mark mentioning he kept it as a backup. The phone was dead, its screen blank and unresponsive. David carefully charged it, his heart pounding with anticipation. He didn't know what he hoped to find, but he felt a sense of urgency, a feeling that this phone held a crucial piece of the puzzle. After what seemed like an eternity, the phone flickered to life. The screen displayed a forgotten wallpaper, a picture of Mark and David as children, grinning mischievously at the camera. A wave of nostalgia washed over David, a bittersweet reminder of the simpler times they had shared. He tried to access the phone, but it was locked with a passcode. David tried every combination he could think of: Mark's birthday, his anniversary, their parents' birthdays, even their childhood street address. But none of them worked. Frustration mounted, threatening to overwhelm him. He felt so close to uncovering the truth, yet he was blocked by a simple 4-digit code. He spent hours researching online, searching for ways to bypass the passcode. He learned about various software programs and hacking techniques, but they all seemed complicated and risky. He was hesitant to tamper with the phone too much, fearing that he might accidentally erase the data. Just as he was about to give up, he remembered something Mark had once told him. Mark had a terrible memory for passwords and often relied on a simple trick to remember them. He would use a combination of numbers that were significant to him, but arranged in a way that only he would understand. David racked his brain, trying to recall any numbers that might have been particularly meaningful to Mark. Then it hit him. Mark had always been obsessed with prime numbers. He had even used them as passwords for various online accounts. David tried entering the first 4 prime numbers, 2357. It didn't work. He tried rearranging them in different combinations, but still no luck. Then he remembered that Mark had a particular fondness for the number 17. He tried incorporating 17 into the passcode, but it still didn't unlock the phone. Finally, in a moment of inspiration, he realized that Mark might have been using the digits of 17 to represent the letters of his name. MRK. If M was 1, A was 7. He quickly rearranged the numbers, 1741. He held his breath and entered the code. The phone unlocked. A wave of relief washed over him, followed by a surge of adrenaline. He had finally cracked the code. He scrolled through the phone, examining the photos, messages, and apps. Most of it was old and irrelevant, but then he noticed something unusual: a hidden app called Private Notes. The app icon was disguised as a simple calculator, making it easily overlooked. He tapped on the icon, and the app opened, displaying a prompt for another password. This time, David knew he was getting close. This time, he knew he was on the verge of discovering the truth. He stared at the password prompt, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He was about to unlock a secret that could change everything. David stared at the password prompt for the Private Notes app, his mind racing. He tried several more combinations: Mark's mother's maiden name, his childhood pet's name, even the name of his first girlfriend. But none of them worked. He was starting to feel defeated, the hope that had surged through him moments ago beginning to fade. He decided to take a break, to clear his head and approach the problem with a fresh perspective. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at his desk, staring blankly at the wall. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes fell upon a framed photograph of Mark standing in front of a famous clock tower during a trip to Europe. Mark had always been fascinated by clocks and time, often collecting vintage watches and meticulously studying their intricate mechanisms. That's when it hit him. The password might be related to time. He rushed back to the phone, his heart pounding with renewed hope. He examined the photograph of the clock tower, trying to decipher the time displayed on the clock face. It was difficult to make out the exact time, but it appeared to be around 3:17. He tried entering 0317 as the password. It didn't work. He tried reversing the numbers, entering 7130. Still nothing. He tried adding the year the photograph was taken, but that didn't work either. He was about to give up when he remembered something else Mark had told him. Mark had a particular interest in military time, often using it to schedule his appointments and track his work hours. He converted 3:17 p.m. to military time, which was 1517. He entered 1517 as the password. The app unlocked. The screen displayed a list of files, each labeled with a date and time. Most of the files appeared to be text documents, but one file stood out, a voice recording labeled Project Finalization. The date on the file was just a few days before Mark's death. David hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding washing over him. He knew that this recording held the key to unlocking the truth about Mark's death, but he was also afraid of what he might find. He took a deep breath and tapped on the file. The recording began with a few seconds of silence, followed by the sound of Mark clearing his throat. Then, Mark's voice filled the room, calm and measured, but with an underlying tone of coldness that David had never heard before. "This is it," Mark began. "The final stage of the project. Everything is in place. The arrangements have been made. The stage is set." David's blood ran cold. He listened in stunned silence as Mark proceeded to detail his plan to stage his own death, making it look like a tragic accident. He described the location, the timing, the specific steps he would take to ensure that everything went according to plan. He explained his motives, a complex mix of jealousy, resentment, and financial desperation. He revealed that he had been secretly struggling with debt for years, and that he saw his own death as the only way to escape his financial burdens and provide for his family. He spoke of his resentment towards David, his envy of David's freedom and artistic talent, his belief that David had always been the favored son. He revealed that he had secretly sabotaged David's career opportunities in the past, driven by a need to maintain his position as the successful, accomplished brother. As David listened to Mark's chilling confession, he felt a wave of emotions wash over him: shock, disbelief, anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of grief. He couldn't believe that his own brother, the man he had loved and admired, had been capable of such deception and cruelty. He had uncovered the truth, but the truth was far more devastating than he could have ever imagined. The weight of the revelation pressed down on David, suffocating him. He replayed the voice note again and again, each time finding new layers of meaning, new depths of betrayal. The brother he had known, the brother he had loved, was a carefully constructed facade, hiding a dark and twisted soul. He paced his apartment, his mind reeling, unable to reconcile the image of Mark he held in his memory with the cold, calculating voice on the recording. Was everything a lie? Had their entire relationship been built on a foundation of deceit and resentment? He felt a surge of anger, a burning desire for revenge. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to make Mark pay for the pain he had inflicted. But he also felt a profound sense of grief, a deep and inconsolable sadness for the loss of his brother, the loss of their shared history, the loss of the future they would never have. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't know what. He was torn between his loyalty to his family and his sense of justice. He couldn't simply ignore the voice note, pretending that he hadn't heard it. He couldn't allow Mark to get away with his deception, to leave behind a legacy of lies. But he also couldn't bear the thought of exposing Mark's secrets, of shattering his parents' hearts, of forever tarnishing the memory of his brother. He knew that revealing the truth would have devastating consequences, not only for himself but for everyone he loved. He considered destroying the voice note, burying the truth forever. He could pretend that he had never found the phone, that Mark's death was truly an accident. He could protect his family from the pain and shame that would inevitably follow. But he knew that he couldn't live with himself if he did that. He couldn't betray Mark's memory by covering up his crimes. He couldn't allow injustice to prevail. He owed it to Mark, and he owed it to himself, to bring the truth to light. He spent the next few hours wrestling with his conscience, weighing the pros and cons, agonizing over the decision he had to make. He sought advice from his friends and family, but they were unable to offer any clear guidance. They were shocked by the news of the voice note, but they couldn't tell him what to do. Ultimately, David realized that the decision was his and his alone. He had to follow his own moral compass, to do what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences. He knew that revealing the truth would be painful, that it would shatter his family and change his life forever. But he also knew that it was the only way to honor Mark's memory, to bring closure to his grief, and to ensure that justice was served. With a heavy heart, David made his decision. He would take the voice note to the police. He would expose Mark's secrets. He would let the truth prevail, no matter the cost. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared to face the consequences, to fight for justice, and to honor the memory of the brother he had loved, even in the face of his shocking betrayal. The accidental death ruling would soon be challenged. The fluorescent lights of the police station hummed, casting a sterile glow on the worn linoleum floor. David sat in a hard plastic chair, clutching the old smartphone in his trembling hands. Across from him sat Detective Miller, a seasoned officer with a weary expression and a reputation for being thorough and unflappable. David had called the police earlier that day, requesting to speak with someone about new evidence in his brother's case. He had been vague about the nature of the evidence, wanting to reveal the full story in person. Detective Miller, initially skeptical, had agreed to meet with him out of professional courtesy. David explained his suspicions about Mark's death, recounting his meticulous investigation and his discovery of the old smartphone. He described his efforts to unlock the phone and his eventual discovery of the hidden, private notes app. He then played the voice recording for Detective Miller. As the chilling confession filled the room, Detective Miller's expression remained impassive, but David could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. When the recording ended, Detective Miller sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the information. "This is quite a revelation, Mr. David," he said finally, his voice measured. "If this recording is authentic, it completely changes everything." Detective Miller asked David a series of questions, probing for details about the phone, the app, and the circumstances surrounding Mark's death. He seemed particularly interested in Mark's motives, his financial situation, and his relationship with David. David answered the questions truthfully and to the best of his ability, holding nothing back. He explained the subtle tensions between him and Mark, the jealousy and resentment that had simmered beneath the surface of their brotherly affection. He admitted that he had been aware of Mark's financial struggles, but he had never imagined that they were so severe. Detective Miller thanked David for his cooperation and assured him that he would take the evidence seriously. He explained that the voice recording would need to be analyzed to verify its authenticity, and that the case would be reopened pending the results of the analysis. "This could take some time, Mr. David," Detective Miller said. "But I assure you, we will do everything we can to get to the bottom of this. If your brother's death was indeed a premeditated act, we will bring the person responsible to justice." David left the police station feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation. He had done what he believed was right, but he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. He had exposed Mark's secrets, but he had also unleashed a storm of controversy and uncertainty. He returned to his apartment, feeling exhausted and emotionally drained. He tried to distract himself with his art, but he couldn't focus. The image of Mark's face, both the loving brother he remembered and the cold, calculating voice he had heard on the recording, haunted him. He knew that his life would never be the same. He had crossed a line, a point of no return. He had betrayed his brother's memory, but he had also upheld justice. He had shattered his family, but he had also uncovered the truth. He was a man forever changed, forever burdened by the weight of his decision. But he also knew that he had done the right thing, that he had honored Mark's memory by fighting for justice, and that he would eventually find peace, knowing that the truth had finally been revealed. The reopening of the case was just the beginning. Days turned into weeks as David waited for news from the police. The uncertainty was agonizing, the constant anticipation a heavy burden on his already strained emotions. He tried to resume his normal life, to focus on his art, but the chilling confession echoed in his mind, making it impossible to find peace. Finally, Detective Miller called. He asked David to come to the police station. David's heart pounded as he made his way to the station, bracing himself for whatever news awaited him. Detective Miller greeted him with a somber expression. "Mr. David," he said, "I have some news regarding the voice recording. Our audio experts have analyzed the recording, and they have confirmed that it is authentic. The voice on the recording is indeed your brother, Mark. Furthermore, they have determined that the recording has not been altered or tampered with in any way." David felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by a surge of renewed grief. The confirmation of the recording's authenticity meant that Mark's death was not an accident, that he had deliberately planned his own demise. Based on this new evidence, Detective Miller continued, "We have officially reopened the investigation into your brother's death. We are now treating this case as a possible homicide." Detective Miller explained that the police would be re-examining the scene of Mark's death, interviewing witnesses, and gathering any additional evidence that might shed light on the circumstances surrounding his death. He also informed David that he would likely be called upon to provide further assistance with the investigation. The reopening of the case sent shockwaves through the community. The media picked up the story, and Mark's death became a subject of intense public scrutiny. David found himself thrust into the spotlight, fielding questions from reporters and dealing with the constant attention of the media. His parents were devastated by the news. They refused to believe that Mark had taken his own life, let alone that he had deliberately staged his death. They accused David of fabricating the voice recording, of trying to tarnish Mark's memory. David tried to explain the truth to them, but they were unwilling to listen. They clung to the image of Mark as the perfect son, unable to accept the reality of his dark secrets. The rift between David and his parents grew wider, their relationship strained to the breaking point. Despite the personal toll, David remained determined to see justice served. He knew that Mark's actions had caused immense pain and suffering, and he was committed to ensuring that the truth was revealed, no matter the cost. As the police investigation intensified, new details began to emerge. Witnesses came forward with information that had been previously overlooked. Financial records revealed the extent of Mark's debt and the desperate measures he had taken to conceal his financial troubles. The police began to suspect that Mark may have had an accomplice, someone who had helped him plan and execute his death. They started to investigate Mark's closest friends and associates, searching for any evidence that might link them to the crime. The truth was slowly but surely coming to light, unraveling the carefully constructed facade that Mark had created. With the case officially reopened, the police meticulously revisited the cliff where Mark had died. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward accident now presented a landscape of inconsistencies and carefully orchestrated details. The forensic team, armed with the knowledge of Mark's confession, scrutinized the terrain with renewed focus. They discovered subtle signs of staging, small disturbances in the ground that suggested Mark had deliberately positioned himself for the fall. The distribution of loose gravel, initially dismissed as natural, now appeared to have been manipulated to create a more precarious footing. They also found traces of a chemical substance on Mark's hiking boots, a type of lubricant commonly used in climbing gear. The presence of the lubricant was perplexing, as Mark had not been climbing, but rather hiking on a relatively flat trail. The police theorized that Mark may have applied the lubricant to his boots to reduce friction, making it easier for him to slip and fall. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed Mark's colleagues and acquaintances, delving deeper into his personal and professional life. A different picture of Mark began to emerge, a stark contrast to the image of the successful and charming executive that he had carefully cultivated. Several colleagues revealed that Mark had been under immense pressure at work, facing increasing scrutiny from his superiors due to his declining performance. They also mentioned that he had been involved in a series of risky investments that had gone sour, leaving him deeply in debt. Some acquaintances described Mark as being increasingly withdrawn and secretive in the weeks leading up to his death. They noted that he had been acting strangely, making cryptic remarks and avoiding social gatherings. One former colleague, a woman named Sarah, came forward with a particularly damning revelation. She claimed that Mark had confided in her about his financial troubles and his resentment towards David. She said that Mark had expressed envy of David's freedom and artistic talent, and that he had accused David of coasting through life while he, Mark, was burdened with responsibility. Sarah also revealed that Mark had hinted at a plan to reset his life, to escape his financial problems and start over. She had dismissed his remarks as the ramblings of a stressed-out executive, but in light of the voice recording, she now realized that he had been serious. As the investigation progressed, the evidence against Mark mounted, painting a clear picture of a man driven to desperation by financial woes and consumed by jealousy and resentment. The accidental death ruling was now firmly replaced by a case of premeditated self-destruction, carefully disguised as a tragic accident. The police were now focusing on whether Mark acted alone or if someone assisted him in his plan. This brought renewed scrutiny to those closest to him, including his own brother, David. The investigation was far from over. As the investigation continued, the police focused on Mark's closest associates, scrutinizing their financial records, phone logs, and travel history. They eventually identified one individual who appeared to have a close connection to Mark and a potential motive for assisting him in his plan, Mark's business partner, Robert. Robert had been struggling financially for years, and he owed Mark a significant amount of money. The police discovered that Mark had taken out a life insurance policy shortly before his death, naming Robert as the beneficiary. They also found evidence that Robert had been in contact with Mark in the days leading up to his death, exchanging a series of coded messages. Flashbacks began to interweave with the present, revealing Mark's meticulous planning in the weeks leading up to his death. We see Mark researching different methods of staging an accident, studying forensic techniques, and practicing his deception. We see him carefully crafting the voice recording, rehearsing his lines, and perfecting his tone. We see him manipulating Robert, exploiting his financial vulnerabilities, and convincing him to assist in his plan. The flashbacks show Robert initially hesitant, but gradually succumbing to Mark's pressure, lured by the promise of financial reward. We see him helping Mark purchase the life insurance policy, scouting the location of the staged accident, and providing him with the chemical lubricant for his boots. The evidence against Robert mounted, leading to his arrest and indictment on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Robert initially denied any involvement in Mark's death, but he eventually broke down under intense questioning, confessing to his role in the scheme. The story culminates in a tense and dramatic courtroom scene. David sits in the gallery, watching as Robert is tried for his crimes. The prosecution presents a compelling case, weaving together the voice recording, the forensic evidence, and Robert's confession to paint a damning picture of premeditation and conspiracy. Robert's defense attorney argues that Robert was merely a pawn in Mark's elaborate scheme, a victim of Mark's manipulation and deception. He claims that Robert was unaware of Mark's true intentions, believing that he was simply helping him with a harmless prank. The jury deliberates for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty. Robert was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of emotions, relief, anger, and sadness. David sat silently, watching as Robert was led away, feeling a complex mix of emotions himself. He had achieved justice for Mark, but at a great personal cost. The trial brought Mark's true motives to light, exposing his financial struggles, his jealousy towards David, and his carefully orchestrated plan to deceive everyone. The media seized upon the story, sensationalizing the details and turning Mark into a figure of public scorn. David grappled with the aftermath of the trial, struggling to come to terms with the truth about his brother. He felt a profound sense of grief for the loss of the brother he had known, the brother he had loved. He also felt a deep sense of betrayal, knowing that Mark had harbored such resentment towards him. He found himself revisiting their childhood memories, searching for clues, trying to understand how Mark had become the man he was. He realized that the tensions between them had been there all along, simmering beneath the surface, but he had been too blind to see them. He also felt a measure of relief that justice had been served. Robert had been held accountable for his role in Mark's death, and the truth had finally been revealed. He knew that Mark's actions were unforgivable, but he also felt a sense of compassion for the desperation and despair that had driven him to such extremes. Over time, David began to heal. He reconnected with his art, finding solace and expression in his creative pursuits. He started to rebuild his relationship with his parents, slowly helping them to accept the truth about Mark. He realized that he couldn't erase the past, but he could learn from it. He could honor Mark's memory by remembering the good times, by cherishing the bond that they had shared, and by forgiving him for his flaws. He visited Mark's grave, standing silently before the headstone.